We're excited to have you to talk about a very important topic, one of the biggest conversations, I would argue, in the last 6 months, and even more so going forward, and how it will impact our future. And today, we're talking about education. We're educating you, educating us about education. Education has changed dramatically, as we know, over the last 6 months. Universities, school systems of all shapes and sizes at all levels pretty much had to go virtual at an instant. In some cases, no more than 3 weeks had to go from physical to completely online and virtual. How did that affect us? What technologies were applied? Where were the investments made? And where are the opportunities that still stand today as universities and education continue to shift and adjust and try to figure out not just the path forward for education, but also new potential business models that may be introduced to keep themselves going longer and still relevant in our worlds as well. So, as we do on every episode, thank you very much for joining us today. At any point, if you have questions, comments, concerns, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you like what you hear, click the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and also a shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for bringing VCTV possible to you and all of us together. Now, that being said, I want to introduce my panelists. We were talking a little bit about this subject offline moments ago. As I mentioned, the Wall Street Journal had just reported that 3 weeks was that time frame where companies were actually shifting completely to virtual. We've got school systems all around the United States that are trying to figure out, do we go virtual? Half on campus, half not on campus, off days, on days. Where does what technology plays a role? We look at university and education in Asia. We look at it in Latin America, Africa, Europe, throughout the rest of the world. It's very, very different and very changing, as some are going back. Some may not be. Some still be determined as school starts back up in about 3 weeks. So let's dive in and see where we go. Dion, welcome to the show. As we do with every show, a welcome to yourself, a little introduction, a little background on how you got into the space.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. Good to be back with you. So I'm Dion DeLoof out of San Francisco. We've got a fund, AI8 Ventures, that about 3.5 years deep into our second fund, and we invest in early stage tech companies, multi-sector, but usually around a Series A, sometimes a Series B, and as early as seed. So current fund, we've invested in 10 different companies, and start looking at raising our next fund here in the fall. And generally what we look for is high social impact. Certainly when it comes to EdTech and some FinTech related to that, we've invested in a number of companies in pretty dynamic space at the moment.
Wonderful. And Tony, welcome back as well to the show. I got 3 returnees. This is an exciting show with a newbie who we'll get to in just a moment. I think she's probably going to be the most impactful on the entire episode based on our conversation offline. So Tony, you've got a lot to live up to right now. So welcome back to the show, a little intro and background.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Glad to be back, glad to be supporting and with this great group of people. I'm Tony Evans, I'm founder of FGC Group. We're based out of Tokyo, but we have global offices. We specialize in helping individuals and family offices get into the marketplace, but also we started the other side of the business of helping the businesses that want to enter, but also those businesses that have failed. We offer an exit for these blockchain crypto projects. We actually do M&A, and also we do an exit strategy for them. So we're more finance from the old and the new, and we're trying to merge these two together.
Wonderful. Gary, welcome back to the show as well. Pleasure to have you here again, and a little intro background on yourself as well.
Yeah. Good to see you, Kyle. So Gary Fowler, I'm the CEO and co-founder of GSD Venture Studios and AI Venture Studios. We're looking for the most incredible companies throughout the world. I've done 15 companies. My biggest exit was Click Software. I was on the original team, $1.35 billion. I started Eva.ai 4 years ago with a billionaire from Russia, Dr. David Yang. It's about a $700 million AI company. I write a lot for Forbes. I write 3 to 5 articles a week all over the world. speak. I'm passionate. I love AI. I've been doing AI for a long time. You know, I don't want to date myself, but I worked in Lisp and Ops 5 down in Washington, D.C. So it wasn't really AI, but it was called AI. So, I mean, our thing, I started the top accelerator in Russia. The top private corporate accelerator in the world is GVA, and I started that. And I also started the first accelerator in Russia at Skolkovo. So I just love it. Where we are now is we take the companies, I call it 3.0, because when a company wants to go global and they're looking at AI, they come to us.
I love it. And welcome back to the show, our AI experts. We got AI, blockchain, fintech, a little bit of education, a little bit of M&A. And without further ado, welcoming our newest guest to the show here on VCTV, Elizabeth. Welcome to the show. Same with everybody else. Little intro background.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tweedale. I'm the founder and CEO of Cypher. And we are on the other side. We're a company and we teach children from the age of 4 all the way up to 14 how to code. And so, like you were mentioning, we've shifted all of our programs online, which was in the plans, but happened in 1 week's time instead. So now we are kind of working on expanding globally. We're based in London in the UK, so with heavily ingrained in the UK educational system, which of course for primary school education is one of the top educational systems in the world. So just applying that knowledge and currently scaling.
Wonderful, exciting. We this is going to be a great conversation. We've got a great set of panelists. Very excited to dive in, and I want to start kind of off Elizabeth's point and what she had to go through. And Elizabeth, I would love to hear kind of your lessons learned having to switch through from physical to virtual everything, because I would love to get everyone's opinion on the current state of education, what's happening and what's about to happen. And then we'll start diving into some of the other areas. But Elizabeth, let's start with you. I mean, you went through this. Yeah. I mean, this is a process. I did this 4 years ago when there wasn't a pandemic, when it was okay to transition. So how have you gone through this process and what have you learned? What's kind of the current state of things?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I was very fortunate because I have a team that is works really well remotely. I think that was one of the big challenges that I've seen with a lot of other companies that I speak to. But we kind of all pulled together and did this thing quite quickly. And because they're used to me automating everything, they shifted very quickly. And the other thing is when you've done everything in person, so at Cypher, we predominantly run holiday camps, after school clubs, all of those kinds of things, with which the logistics behind that, we always like to say is kind of a logistical nightmare. I mean, we have camps and kids and every kit going every which direction and everything arriving on time. And so when you do all of that same thing online, it actually seems really simple and straightforward. So that's quite helpful. But we shifted everything within a week. And it's quite interesting because the panic that we saw from the parents on the other side of the Zoom calls was kind of really heightened at the beginning. Of course, we were all in this really state of flux. But actually, you know, now we've taught over 4,000 hours of online teaching since April, and the kids have become really proficient with all of their technology, which is something we haven't seen before. I've been teaching children how to code and written books about teaching coding to kids since 2013. And the progression that we've seen in the last 3 months is literally, you know, off the scale, off the charts. And so I think that that's going to actually apply to how parents see education and how we can actually apply a higher quality of education to a broader range of children that obviously have access to computers and internet.
And mobile phones. I mean, Fortnite versus, you know, learning how to code. It's a little different. A question on that. So you taught 4,000 hours since April. Is that a dramatic increase to what you normally would have done? So are you seeing the opportunity to teach more?
Yeah, we probably would have seen about half that at our in-person camps, but now our community is growing globally very quickly. So we have students from America, Ireland, Switzerland, kind of all through English-speaking Europe. And then obviously our UK population has grown exponentially as well. So the access to students has obviously been really helpful. So it's kind of just accelerated our growth plans to go global more quickly.
Yeah. And it kind of puts you on the spot. What are some of the top languages that kids are learning, or what are you guys teaching in terms of language the most right now?
Yeah, that's one of the questions parents always ask us, which language should my child learn? But at Cypher, we kind of really believe that the fundamentals of computational thinking and computer science is what can then be applied to different languages. So that's what we really pride ourselves in, is we use creative concepts to teach things. So like ocean conservation, you would learn how to program a drone to pick up a Lego, because drones are being used to find and collect plastics in the ocean. So we use things like Scratch, Blockly, and then we do touch typing at every course. So we transition them into the coding languages. Processing we use a lot of, because it's great visual language. And then obviously JavaScript, and then making their websites, HTML, CSS, that kind of thing. But I think getting into Python is kind of the later stages as well. So sort of starting with processing, JavaScript, and then moving up from that.
You're not 5 years old jumping into Python day one. I mean, that's
Maybe.
I mean, hey,
trying to jump into Python, so
I mean, I see Gary taking notes. Gary's like, okay, 7 years old, Python. All right, how do I get into AI? Oh, this is great. I love it. So, Dion, I see you shaking your head as well. Thank you, Elizabeth. Where are you seeing, kind of off Elizabeth's point, how are you seeing the current state of things around education? I mean, she's coming at it from the coding and seeing massive scale. How are you seeing this from a bigger social impact type of capacity as well?
Sure. So we've let me share more from an investment and a lending perspective in education. So, an example, we invested in and it's not a plug for them, they're not raising right now, but Empower Finance out of Washington, D.C. We've invested in multiple rounds with them, and they make student loans to offshore students, where they started to the U.S. and now branching that out to multiple other countries, UK, Canada, et cetera. So what was interesting with the pandemic, and we talked earlier about, we're now sort of transitioning to post-pandemic thinking, is, they were seeing with the students where the default rate's going to go higher. So and then where more people, you have a pandemic, and in recessions, you see more people going to education, whether that's trade schools, universities, what have you. And so, from my perspective, you asked at a sort of a global worldview of it, is, a few months deep, we haven't seen most of the default rates go higher on the loan. So a number of companies we haven't invested in, but we're still getting the data for student lending and borrowing and what have you, is, a number of lenders, I won't name them, really slam the brakes. They stopped making loans. And so all of a sudden the students were going, well, am I going to go to another country? Am I still going to be able to travel? And if I can't travel, am I still going to be able to enroll? And the answer is yes. And so you still have that debt. So people are doing, remote learning and remote enrollment. But for the most part, and it's segmented, go too deep by country, but broadly speaking, at least yet, and it's very early, we haven't seen the default rates increase, and we've seen the demand increase for people to go and say, hey, this is the window that I'm going to go get additional education. So it's going to be very interesting coming up in the coming months, though, to see what those default rates do. A different conversation, but more from a social challenges of lenders, just like you see and as you might imagine in mortgage markets and what have you, is borrowing has gotten harder. Right, the lenders have gotten more conservative. So now you want to go get that education, and now you can't. And your optionality to do that, depending on which country you're coming from and qualifications, has gotten more difficult. So we're excited about companies that are at least on the lending side to students that are keeping those doors open to what I broadly call the world's underserved, and coming from second and third world markets that can't get loans very easily, but desire education.
And it could introduce a whole new market around microloans as well, right? If people are choosing
absolutely
to not go one route and go see, Elizabeth here, they may be looking at getting a microloan, say for 1,000, as an example, instead of 50,000. So now you've got this microloan type process versus these huge dramatic loans. And I bring this up because was it Harvard just recently mentioned they're taking everything online next year, but not changing the tuition. So it's almost $50,000 a year for a student to go to Harvard to then just take classes online, which if you put that in context for some of the information we know, doesn't compute, right? Why are you going to take the loan out for such a massive amount with the unanswered question on the other side? Whereas again, you could take a microloan or something and be locally, wherever you may be in the world, and still get maybe even a higher education, I would argue. Sorry, Harvard. A higher type of education, maybe more specialized to what you want to learn, right? You can be 7 years old learning Python, or you can be 22 learning AI and building your next company versus, again, the 50,000. But I won't discredit
you hit
Harvard. Go ahead.
No, but you hit on a really interesting point, though, Kyle. I mean, one of the things we look at from a education perspective, right, is do you need the 4-year degree? And if not, if you're going out and you're looking for whichever skills you need, and you're going to learn that, whether that's online or from a certain different types of schools or trade schools or the 4-year universities, you may not need the 4-year university, but you still often you need to. And if you don't have that ability, then what you're talking about, is it microloans? Is it sort of a crowdfunding type of platform that makes loans? And get more into Gary's area, I'm sure, but from an AI perspective, I look at like an Empower's making, the majority of their loans are you're getting a response within minutes, because they're looking at data, and it's taken a long time to get it, but they're looking at data and saying, look, if you're coming from India or Chile or the US, UK, what have you, and saying, instead of your traditional financial scores, we can look at other information and look at what our default rates are going to be very predictably. And it's not a 4-year university, but you need a 6,000 pound or 10,000 US dollar type of a loan. We can do that. And there's companies now that are, they're doing that at very profitably without what I call the payday lending sort of rates that you see those consumers, clients often getting offered. So that's where I get excited around education. Going, you don't need the 4-year degree necessarily, to your point, no disrespect, Harvard, but also then, some very last few years, a number of really unique companies that are going to help you go finance that.
Yeah, and I think there is still something in that 4 years, the social impact, right? As the social interaction comes, and I'm going to come back to that. So we're going to touch on that. But Gary, since Dion threw it to you, and then I'll come to Tony. I mean, where are you seeing kind of the current state of education right now and going forward?
Well, I mean, look at this. We've talked about the digital transformation before, but I mean, think about the amazing impact, incredible impact that this whole transformation is having on education. So if we look at it, as I've said before, 92% of the companies worldwide have started the digital transformation 6 months ago, according to McKinsey. I mean, they've been doing it for a while, but literally it started. Now, we've had to do things, just like Elizabeth said, in a week, she had to go from, offline to online. Think about the kind of social impact that that's going to have. I mean, if you go to Harvard, it's not all about the education. It's about the social experience, right? And the connections. So what we have to do is think about, how do we use technology? It's one thing to have Zoom, but how do we develop those kind of relationships, those fraternities, sororities, those relationships that we get in the university? The other thing is, where do people stay? You're going to Harvard and you're living in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, right? How does this work? Do you have special places? Do you stay at your parents'? Is it now we don't need dormitories and they're co-working? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity that's coming out of this. And we've got to very, very quickly, as Elizabeth has done, we've got to very quickly figure this out, because you're right. This COVID thing is not going away in the near term. It's going to be here, and we got to proceed forward. So I think it's an incredible opportunity for us to think about how to expand the social experience online. So we have a Zoom, but how do we even make it more personal? And how do we use artificial intelligence to help that? Do we do holographic?
And not get zoomed out.
Yeah.
And also not get zoomed out, right? Too many Zooms. I don't know about everybody else. Too many Zooms. I feel like I've been, talking for about 40 hours in one day and want to sleep for 4 days. Like Zoom can be zoomed out. But to your point around where to stay, we had a conversation about this yesterday, as a matter of fact, here on VCTV. And we were talking about how hotels, specifically in New York and some parts of the East Coast here in the US, were repositioning themselves. So you were seeing the repurposing of some of these assets to actually go into becoming dormitories so that they could help with the 6-foot social distancing for now, for temporary, and creating these, new repurposed assets as the real estate market is shifting and changing as well, right? Will commercial real estate still be there the way it was, at the end of last year? Probably not, but can it be used in an educational format? Like you said, I think there's definitely opportunity there as well. But Tony, to you as well, Gary brought this up of, technology being implemented, but before we get there, where are you seeing the current state of education? I mean, even from the M&A side, there is something to be had and said around M&A in education, and no one is talking about it. So, the Grand Master of M&A, tell us.
You just hit it, and I think it's exactly the same thing of the traditional business model and the online business model. I think that's where the opportunity has come into from the M&A, is merging these two business models together. Like you just mentioned about Harvard doing the online classes, okay? But you've then got one of the other Ivy Leagues like Cornell stating, okay, there's no substitute for in person, and I totally agree with that. I think it's exactly what Gary said. There's so much opportunities, and I also believe there's so much opportunities in regards to the social aspect. That's exactly the thing, because most people just want a little bit of education. If you think of all the entrepreneurs out there, okay, most of them don't have the degrees and stuff like that. But the people that do have the degrees, what makes it more important for them is the personal connection, is the human connection that builds everything up from there onwards. I think it's we got one part of it, which is doing all the actual education online. But I think the other part of the education is the social part, is the camaraderie, is the fun part of it. And I agree with you. It's just the whole aspect of Zoom is, or doing like all these different, it drains you. It basically drains you faster than anything else. It has to be a little bit more fun. But the thing is, if you think about it, Zoom has only come into effect in the last 5 months in this kind of context. So it's still a little bit of a baby. So I don't want to be picking on a child at the moment, but you know what I mean, yeah? The whole thing is, the whole marketplace has to evolve with it. You evolve or you die. And I think exactly that there's opportunities in all aspects. And not just education in the traditional sense, but also social education, like the influencers and all this stuff. Why do all these people make so much money online by selling influencers, marketing and stuff like that? It's the new economy. And I think, as you said, there's a huge opportunity there.
So let's touch on social. We've all touched on it, and to date, all of us, but myself mostly, is, go back to the early days of AOL. You've got mail. AOL introduced instant messaging on a mass scale for many people, right? And that was kind of the birth of what would then become social online interaction and MySpace. Yeah, I'm really throwing it back to our audience, where people started to connect online and started developing these online relationships. And then you had things like Second Life that came into play, again, virtual social interactions. And then we had the explosion of social networks, right? Where the Facebooks of the world came in, and people, I would argue, started developing those types of relationships. Some separated, some very much like you would have in a physical context, right? Where you would meet people one-on-one. I had a great experience where I met someone on LinkedIn. We connected, we chatted. We actually had never met in person, showed up to speak at a conference, didn't know, stood next to each other at a hotel waiting for a car, looked at each other like, hey, you look familiar. It turns out it was the person I had never met for 10 years online until we were standing at a hotel waiting for a car together. Those types of interactions do exist, and there is some type of social validation that can come from that. But to all four of us, or for you guys, what does the world of social engagement and interaction look like if education moves almost 100% online? And Elizabeth, I will come to you first, because you're already dealing with, especially at a very impactful age. At college, we can survive. 4 to 14.
Yeah.
I mean, that's big. How are you guys handling this?
I think that's one of the huge proponents that I've been super passionate about from the beginning. Doing in-person camps, it's so much more work, but actually working together as a team and, debugging things and all of those kinds of things create that social interaction together, which is so important for children and for development. And when you take all of that online, there's so many great, amazing resources out there for example, in our industry, teaching children how to code, like Tinker or Bitsbox or all of these things. But because they're self-led, it always sort of falls behind. So even when we can bring some of those into our courses in front of the scenes, the one-to-one live interaction with a teacher is the most important thing. And beyond that is having those new friends that they make in the classes. So I think to the point about Harvard charging the same amount that they would in person, I think the only way that works is because in person you could probably have a lecture hall of hundreds of people, whereas online you have to have small engaging interactions, otherwise it just doesn't work. And also I think the next generation is also transitioning to start to form those online relationships the same way we did with AOL Instant Messenger and those kinds of things, but they're doing it through gaming. So I'm also really passionate about finding how we can take the same kind of feeling of gaming, because I was a gamer, so I get it, but actually how do we provide that kind of opportunity for girls as well? Because I'm seeing a lot of our boy and male students have actually been coming out of the pandemic a little bit better because they're still on Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever it is, joining worlds together, creating things. And some of the girls that join in with them, they have seemed to come out the other side a bit more calm and still connected. So how do we create more environments that can bring in a broader range of children to that inclusivity and have that connection, even if it is online as well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like Minecraft was, from the gaming perspective, was an early adoption of this as well. Fortnite, I would argue from all sides, being a gamer myself, seeing kids play this and everything in between is, I think, definitely added that. Animal Crossing, the game that was pretty much sold out and drove the sellout of Nintendo Switches across the country for 3 months. Same thing. Like, I think there's something there in gaming. Maybe for our generation, it was just the early connection, right? We paid $50,000 to Harvard because it was the network we couldn't otherwise get.
Yeah.
Then social network came into play, travel increased, people moved, globalization, all these buzzwords. People moved and were able to connection. So we question that. And now with gaming, I think you're making a great point, is for the next generation, this is their everything in that sense, right? It's a way for them to connect, a way for them to be on the same, sorry for the analogy, playing field, where it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, anything about you. It's just building this genuine relationship, sharing the interest of something, and building something at that same time. So I think you're right.
The most important thing about that is keeping the sizes small. I mean, even right now when we have 4 people on the call with a moderator, that's perfect, right? But if we had 8, it would start to become overwhelming and somebody would get left out. So it's about creating these little pods of people that can interact online, and particularly with children, keeping it small, and the one-on-one interaction is the most important thing.
Absolutely. Some days on VCTV, we do have 8. So I do my best not to leave anybody out. If you're watching, I've left you out, I apologize. It's not Elizabeth, it's my fault. It's my fault. Just send me a note. But no, I completely agree. That small one-on-one, small interaction is much better than the big, to Dion's point, which I want to come to, the big lecture halls, right? The lecture hall mentality, when I went to the university as well, I didn't learn very well. In today's terms, I can listen to a podcast. I can watch a video. I can watch us talk, versus smaller room, 3 to 4, Zoom of 5, 6 of us here. Totally different mentality, to your point. And Dion, Elizabeth and I are just going, so I don't want to leave anybody out because she's already called me out about that. So I'm going to make sure you get a chance.
No worries. I mean, share at least my perspective a little bit. later in your career, so to speak, or a little older is what I should say, is, if you're graduating out of college and you don't have that Harvard network that we're talking about, or you're more established in your career, what's really interesting to me right now is seeing is, in the days of before LinkedIn, trying to find a job, you had the, and I'll date myself, but everyone would go to a Monster, the job boards, and really all you were doing was posting your CV, right, and hoping to be found. And then there was a lot of talk in those days from a talent acquisition is, do we create these sort of rooms and chat areas by specialty? So if you're a programmer or you're in marketing, and we can have a lot of value added sort of items there, and that never really took off, right? They just stayed as basic job boards and became the Indeeds and Monsters and what have you, of the world, and that faded away. And then in some areas, particularly if you're in programming, you might be, the early days of Java, and there was a, almost meetup.com online of we're a bunch of developers and we'll share and we'll network and what have you. But it wasn't really, for most groups, formalized. But now what's really interesting, at least to me, what I'm seeing is in including the recruitment, and some of it, that's where the genesis is there's various companies that have switched to all online, that they specialize just in Java software developers. Or I know one company I was speaking with, and sort of fascinating to me is they do just drone pilots. So in different countries where you're certified to be a drone operator, they're sort of the de facto recruitment platform. But out of that then became their chat rooms, and how do you share the latest and greatest as far as education and anything you ought to know about the drone area. Well, now what they're doing really quickly, and it's being developed, I believe, in real time, is saying, how do we have things like this? So there's that networking, and if you're young in your career and you can't network at an event by handing out business cards, can you join through these specialist areas and network and have small sessions like this and get education? Another company that is in certain area of nursing doing the same thing. And so while they're doing the recruitment and placement, they have sort of their chat rooms, if you will, is what's really, really growing. And they're trying to figure out, how do I, on their side, monetize that? But as a person trying to go, all right, I'm new in my career or established, how do I network in the new world? I believe that it's going to be the very specialized sort of areas where you'll get involved online in those communities. And you've got to search those out and get referred to them. But I believe they're going to grow quite quickly. And that's how, until we can rub shoulders and have coffees and pass business cards, one day in the future, I think that has to be the way that it's done.
Oh, the business card. Where the future of that goes will be fun. But to
anyone miss their old business card books, right?
No. Don't miss carrying those around. But to your point, this is actually kind of interesting, because go back to when Slack launched, not too long afterwards, several Slack groups were created, free and paid. And these were actually very concentrated Slack groups where people had similar interests. Like I joined, I think, one for tech in Asia, my old publication. We had one as well. Just the information did a really good one where the first initial subscribers to the information, about 3,000 people, were all in a chat together. And when you looked at who was in that chat room, you looked at it and you're like, oh my goodness. I mean, you and I live in the Valley, and you're like, I cannot even get a hold of those people. But now all of a sudden we're in the same, again, to both your and Elizabeth point, we're in this special room. Now you're starting to see that with Discord. You're not just for gaming, which is where it started. Now you're seeing that move into other areas, right? These group chats, tutorials, education areas, recruiting. You're seeing that with Twitch as well. So I think you're spot on. It's something we didn't recognize, I would argue, 3 years ago, but it's something that there is now. Even Telegram has this, to call out another social network, right? So we're seeing more of this. I think you're spot on. Gary, I see you. You're ready to jump in. Tony's taking notes. Go for it, Gary. And then Tony, I'm coming to you. Gary, anything else to add? You're on mute, my friend.
No, I'm just listening, and I'm thinking about, just the ways that the world, how this is. I mean, one thing is, as we're here, you're saying zoomed out, we're talking about connections, but think about the changes, the holographic images, the things that need to come in place, because there are these issues. There's one is, the book was Man's Search for Meaning. How do we get that kind of a meaning in these relationships? And it's really interesting for me. And I'm trying to, you know, from an educational standpoint, I'm trying to understand how we get back into it, whether I'm at Cornell, as somebody was saying, or I'm at Harvard University. I'm not sure people are going to want to take the risk to go in to Cornell and, you know, die, right? Or get sick. So we've got some really serious things to do, but it's just, now I'm thinking about how we can apply the artificial intelligence to be able to enhance that experience. And how, like, I was just thinking as you were talking, Kyle, about holographic images, really, and how we could, you know, project and make it really, really cool. So, you know, so the future's today, the future's not tomorrow. And it's not because we want to do it, it's because we have to do it. That's a difference now. And so anyhow, that's just where I am, what I've been thinking about.
Using VCTV as the example. I mean, we're all here. This is step one, right? We've all been brought, we've already talked off show where we all are. So we're all spread all around the world, and we're now here. We got the chance to meet, share, also got a chance to connect with our audience, connect with each other. Now stage two is, let's take this virtual, right? Let's bring the headsets in. Let's bring ourselves where we can be interactive. Dion can be drawing something on a whiteboard. Elizabeth is showing us how to program and ripping apart code. And, you know, Tony is doing a merger virtually. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we can do, right? Like, I'm absolutely with you. I think that is to come. The question is when, and
well, I mean,
at what point?
You know, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I met Emergent Technologies, the investors in Zoom. And then they introduced me to, I think it's Eric. So the founder of Zoom. And so I had like one of the first copies of Zoom, right? An early copy of Zoom. And people were saying, oh, this isn't going to go. You got WebEx, you got Skype, you got this. But here we are today, right? 4 months ago, 30 million users, now daily, now like 300 million. And think about that. So what, you know, we're talking about, you know, using the, you know, Oculus headsets or whatever, but it's going to happen soon. It's not going to happen, you know, a year from now. It's going to start now, because that's how we've got to enhance the experience. People want to connect together, and how do we do it better? And, you know, Elizabeth's case with the students, I mean, having a more interactive experience and getting them engaged. It's about the engagement.
Absolutely. And Tony, to you, anything to add on? I feel like you've taken a book worth of notes over there. You're going to have a new book that you can co-author with Elizabeth over here. It's going to be great. Next bestseller.
No, I'm just thinking there's the opportunities, and that's the main thing. It's from my point of view. I mentioned last time that we've done it through some bars and clubs in Japan, where we've actually taken the bars and clubs virtual. Okay. And that's the main thing. And then engaging that with delivery service, so alcohol is actually delivered to the locations. Yeah. So basically adding all these different businesses to create a new business. And the reason for that is basically it goes down to the five senses. Yeah, like why do we say cheers before drinking? Yeah, it's because it actually completes the five senses. Yeah, you hear it, you smell it, you touch it, and you hear it. So the whole thing is you basically taste it. So it's the same thing. I believe it's the same thing that we have to look at what we're doing now. Okay. We've already gone from the phone to vice versa, and now we're here where we can actually interact and stuff like that. The next, as Gary said, is going to be the digital, so that's a sense, yeah. But I think the next one will be wearing it, yeah. So if somebody touches your hand and stuff like that, you can feel it. The whole thing is, it's all about this. And I'm not a tech person, okay. I don't understand it. I believe Windows was called Windows because you want to throw it out of one, okay. So, but I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a finance guy, and I learn I read a lot, and it's self-education. Yeah. So the whole thing is the old ways is always the same. It always says it cannot be done until it's done, and then that's the future. And it's interesting. So that's where I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing the opportunities here with different things. And yes, it's true. In Japan, where we are, the virtual stuff is real. Yeah, the virtual hologram is real. It's even so real, people are getting married to the holograms, and that is true. You can actually check that out. It's actually, they're getting married to the holograms. So it is there, and that's where I'm looking at the five senses and how do we incorporate for the future.
Normally I would know how to transition, but I'm not sure if I know how to transition from that one. That's a very that's a point to think on for a minute. But it does also, brings up a new business model. There you go. It is a very important thing. To the idea of virtual, right? I remember just when the pandemic happened, everyone thought virtual headsets were going to be necessary, so they sold out as well. And now I think AR and VR, so augmented reality and virtual reality, have taken a step back and looked forward of like, okay, this has been accelerated and we need to be ready. So how do we really start making some applications that can be applicable for the future? And I think we're going to start seeing that as well. And it's coming in stages, right? Apple is working on this. Google's making bigger efforts. Magic Leap at some point will roll something out, but nonetheless, these things are coming here in the probably sooner than later future. But with that, now I figured out my transition. Now with that, let's talk about the technologies going into this. So we've talked about AR, we've talked about VR, we've talked about AI. How else, or what other technologies are being applied to the future of education? I mean, Dion, we've talked about blockchain. There's been a lot of conversation around blockchain and how that could be applied. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, data. I mean, let's throw out the buzzwords here, but really, how is technology, or what technologies are we seeing that are improving the future of education? And really, to Gary's point, it's not the future, it is education. How is technology playing a role in education as we know it today? And Dion, I'm going to throw it to you, and then Elizabeth, Gary, and Tony.
Sure. Well, I think the actual technologies themselves are, you just hit on all of them, right? I mean, you could talk about and say, all right, it's very interesting now. I see blockchain being used, that you're saying, here's my, I can verify what my credentials are. So I just came out of a nursing program, and days gone by, I'd wait for a company to go, fax that over or something, an email. And now it's all in the blockchain, and there's companies that do that, and AR, VR, et cetera. But what's really, I think, an unknown to me, and what we're looking at is, how we learn, right? And maybe, I'll pass it in a minute, perhaps do your role, Kyle, to Elizabeth. But, it's really fascinating. Besides, you're not going to Harvard and being able to, perhaps make those connections, that value is there, but literally, fundamentally, how do we learn? So if you have certain skill sets like coding, and you're a software developer, and you can do that via a Zoom or a chat room, or that you're a very tech-enabled person, wonderful. That's probably much easier and is going to serve you well. But I go back to, we have a company invested in, but related to nursing. And how do you learn, the craft of nursing and taking care of a patient and getting that education? And you can read, and you can get it delivered online and what have you. But how do you actually learn where, a lot of times it's okay. It's sort of the mentor-mentee model, right? You go out and you do your internship, and you're sort of the wing person, and you're observing in real time how you treat those patients. COVID continues, you're not gonna be able to do that, in the same way. So they're looking at like what technologies, do we use, virtual reality to kind of go through scenarios and play those out, but you're not actually doing it with your hands. And is that okay? Surgery is the same. We've got another company looking at it with doctors, and you're already doing robotic surgery, so it's already kind of trending that way. But some things literally are just in hand. So can you do that with a virtual reality and have your mentee coaching you through that? And does the person though actually learn in the same way? And do they have the same sort of level of compassion and patient interaction that may be required? So a long way of I don't know earlier when you're younger how best you learn. That's not my area of expertise, but I certainly know, when I chat with our companies, is they're going, I just wonder, when it's not so much in person, what is lost, but also then I think there's a lot of opportunities of what's gained there. But there'll be all the, for the hardcore technology side, I think it'll be what you just mentioned. It's just how well that's executed.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, to you.
Yeah, I think Dion, you've touched on a great point. You've mentioned all of the kind of software things and the ways that we can learn on software, which I don't think we have a problem with being moved virtually. But what I think is the most important thing of how technology is going to be used in education is how we actually personalize that education again. So, and also going back to old school things like using the post to send something out. So for our students, as an example, using actual physical computing devices is a huge proponent of how do we actually get technology in the world around us to work for us. I mean, you can't hook up any of these things without the Internet of Things. And so how do we get those things to the kids so that they can have it hands-on? So sending out microbits as an example so that each kid has one before they go on a camp, but also creating that personal journey, which a lot of kind of early educational testing sites and things like that are doing. So, and even within our Cypher curriculum, how do you make sure that each child's learning progression is specific to them? And I think that's one of the opportunities that technology presents to us. And we've been using that to, you know, harness it to be very specific for each child. But again, bringing what I find, especially with the younger generation, are the things that we took for granted, you know, because we grew up with them, like the fact that a typewriter actually prints as it types, which they think is amazing. Or when they get a piece of mail that's addressed to them, you know, they just don't get that anymore. But it's sort of taking it one step further and back to that human interaction. So you can get all of those crates and things through the mail every month, but who actually sits down to do those with their kids? I mean, I think I have stacks of them, and if anyone was going to do it, it'd probably be me, but maybe I've done it once. So it's, yes, getting those stacks through the mail, but then having that person on the other side of the screen to talk you through it. So I think it's just engaging online with the physical and making things personal will be how we can use technology.
So with that being said, so the microbits, I want to bring this up before we continue on the conversation. 3D printing. You know, we've talked about this a few times, and actually over the past week, as a matter of fact, almost to date, on VCTV about 3D printing and its growing role in different industries. Education is one, it hasn't been brought up yet.
Well, we're going to actually be doing a 3D printing camp in a couple of weeks. So we actually send a 3D printer to each child, and then they design and print their own mask, of course, in this day and age. But so they'll all have their own little customized 3D printed mask. So we send them the kit ahead of time, and then they learn how to do it and problem solve. And again, it's that one-on-one interaction. We're partnering up with a 3D printing company and a kind of computing company that can send all together. But it's how do you get also that personal help when you need it and as you need it in terms of your education. But yeah, 3D printing, you've got to have the printer there. But so
right, that's the only downside. But soon we may have them like virtual reality. We may have a 3D printer in our homes everywhere, right?
Absolutely. It's sort of like sending it to print someplace else. But I think the learning through doing, you get so much out of it that if that's possible, should keep it going.
Yeah, and I mean, both to what you and Dion are saying so far, I mean, to me, this seems like one of the greatest times to be educated in anything, right? You can literally get educated by anyone at any time, anywhere, on any subject in terms of specialties. I mean, as we are very open, as we'll mention at the end of the show, you know, we're all available online. You can reach out to us. We generally respond. Sometimes we're a little slow, we get busy, but you can get a hold of us. So you can reach out to anybody of our caliber above and beyond that you want to learn from. And it's crazy the amount of opportunity that sits in front of you if you really want to learn something at any age, now more than ever. And I think going forward, in my opinion, and I want to hear more from Gary and Tony too, my opinion, this is going to be the norm, where some of us will have the freedom and flexibility to give more back. Others will just be a part of our lives, right? As a mentor, as an advisor, as an investor, as an educator, we'll jump in and out of that world. But I mean, damn. There's no other way to say it. And I apologize to the audience for dropping that, but it doesn't sound like there's a better time to learn anything than right now and going forward on any subject you want to. So with that being said, plus with podcasts, VCTV and other things, I mean, there's education aplenty. Gary, Tony, to you both, I mean, where else are you seeing technology play a role, and maybe how is it playing a role? Gary, yes, you're a lover of AI. You've dropped it 7 times. I've counted. Where is it playing?
What can I say? I mean, AI is the new electricity. So
there it is.
About it. A few years ago, when we started EVA, I came up with an idea of using semi-supervised and unsupervised artificial intelligence, an assistant. So this one was to go through all your repositories, Slack, Telegram, WhatsApp, all your repositories, and basically pull information down and give it to you. So for instance, if I say, where's the presentation I sent you last week or 2 months ago, you can't find it. I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's in WhatsApp. I don't know if it's in Facebook, LinkedIn, doesn't matter. Well, imagine having one assistant. So to your point, I believe that having these smart assistants, now mentors, to be able to help those students in a very, very customized and personal way to guide them, just like, a super smart mentor. And I believe that's a trend that's going to happen sooner than later. Some of the technology exists because we actually developed it. So I think not for teaching, but we did it for taking this incredible amount of information in our personal clouds. But those kind of things, those kind of technologies are spot on for how this thing needs to evolve.
Absolutely. We'll think about it. We had Clippy. There's a real throwback. We had Clippy, a little paper clip for those that don't know, a little paper clip animation that Microsoft introduced in what was then just Microsoft Office and pretty much in Word. And it would just say, hey, how can I help you? It was the nicest, most annoying little thing that ever came up and crashed most of the time because it was too much to handle for the computer. But we had this and it was early days of it. And now I think you're right. In the generation that's coming in education right now is used to devices that say, hey, Alexa, hopefully I didn't trigger that for anybody. What's the answer to this? Or what happened here? Or what happened when, right? We have a generation that's being trained, including ourselves, to ask a device or an assistant for help. And I think you're spot on. Is this a huge opportunity to open up that world of, learning how to do something and saying, hey, how can I solve this? Or and them actually helping you through it versus giving you the straight answer, which is what we have now, right? It's a one-to-one versus a one-to-many type.
I mean, Kyle, yesterday, right? So I did I have an AI show, and my partner, this billionaire Tony Stark guy, my partner in 3 companies. Anyhow, so we get in, we took Eva, and so Eva has now become the consciousness of his house. So he's got a $40-50 million house. It actually moved walls. If it doesn't like you, it won't let you in a house. He has a robotic dog that works with the house. The dog patrols. The dog keeps the deer away. The dog. So, I mean, it's like, was it Boston Dynamics or whatever on steroids? Seriously, it exists.
We need to get a video of that to show the kids, please.
There you go.
And it
the
works.
New educator right here, AI teacher #1. There you go.
It can go down through, anyhow, that technology. So it's communicating with me. It's asking me about music as we speak. It's crazy. It's, because I communicate with his house. It likes me.
So, oh, well, that's a good thing. It's good to be on the good side of that and not the bad side.
So imagine the capabilities. When he gets up in the morning, it knows, it can kind of sense the things that he likes. It actually has movable panels in his house that move with like weather. Hey, listen, you might want this. If it's in a bad mood, right? He trains it to be good, right? But if it's in a bad mood, maybe the coffee doesn't get turned on, that kind of thing. But these kind of I wrote an article, actually, I have an article in Forbes magazine, and I just wrote a Medium about emotion AI. I can actually send a link, but this stuff seriously is the next level of where we're going, because in a point to where with education, what do teachers have? Compassion, empathy, caring. So the AI that exists today doesn't have it. We need to build those training sets in to make it compassionate. So we don't have the bad, as Elon Musk said, the bad AI. We need to train it. And there's a great opportunity for education and nurses, places where compassion is critically important.
I think all of us are jealous of that home, first off. But Elizabeth's like, this is game on. Her entire student set is ready to reprogram this home for the good.
Yeah, exactly. We need to make miniature versions of it in our classes.
There you go. She's got the 3D printer ready to go too. Like this guy's house is going to have all kinds of new art. He doesn't even know it. It's all going to be connected. You're spot on. And that's, all we talk about here on VCTV, but really all we have invested in together, what we've been looking at over the years or coding or developing it's all finally here in pieces and coming together in its bigger picture. You know, the Internet of Things I've been talking about for 10 years. Well, guess what? It's now starting to actually be a reality, to your point, and is coming this way. This is where things are starting to get exciting. People are talking about this next decade could be huge and transformative. It could be. And it will be if we're applying these types of things, because this technology is ready. Are we ready? And is the infrastructure ready? And I think the answers to those things are coming as yeses. Tony, before I steal the stage, because I'm so nerded out by what Gary just told us, I want to talk about that forever. A little bit to you, what other opportunities are we seeing in technology, and where are these being applied?
I think it's we've gone through education, we've gone through medical. The medical is one that we've invested quite heavily into. Okay, I think the next one is going to be the entertainment. So I think the entertainment is already there, but it hasn't gone to the real next stage. I believe you've already seen the streaming and stuff like that, but we've seen options where the live TV is being created, especially with in an animated world and stuff like that. So the whole thing is the entertainment, I believe, will be a huge one going forward. That is one area we see a huge opportunity. The virtual, from the games and stuff like that to actual like shows for all these streaming companies. I think that's the next one. But the thing is, I think it's an interesting thing. It's we're programmed to ask a machine and gives us an answer. People don't question that these days either. Like they believe everything that it says is correct. And I think exactly like Gary said, it needs to be educated to basically either question or something like that, because not all answers are correct sometimes. It's only as good as the information that's put into it. So it's like water. Water gives us life, but it also kills us. It's how do we use it as human beings, yeah?
That's a very good point. Very good point. So guys, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I want to get into the lightning round, as I like to refer to it, because it just sounds more fun than we've only got a few questions left. But I do want to ask a few questions before we wrap up. And you know, as investors and looking at this industry, you know, what advice do you have for founders that are building in it? We've talked a lot about the opportunities, and I think we only touched on a surface of those. There's so many in a good way for what's to come. But as investors, what advice do you have for founders looking to build in this space, or those companies? Remember, universities are trying to figure out how to survive and how to readjust and rethink their business models and open up new ones. So what advice do you have for those in this space going forward? Tony, let's start with you, and then we'll come around to everybody.
I think from the universities and stuff, they should look at what's already working at the moment. Yeah, you can see all these courses like Udemy and all these places that are selling these courses. You have all these influencers doing the same thing. I think this kind of education is what people want. They want to basically specialize in something. They want get the credit and then move on to something else. They don't want to take let's say a 4-year course and only have one part of it that's applicable to what they want. I think the one thing that's constant between everybody is we have 24 hours. Yeah, I think everybody now wants to make that time much more valuable in regards to using it. And that's my point of view, is basically use what's already happening. Why do influence get it? Like the Tony Robbins and all these people and Cal Cardone, they put the actual course that people want and then move forward. I think if we could do that, see what's working and evolve it. Yeah.
Absolutely, Gary.
Yeah, I think that we need to think differently, and we need to understand, as I said earlier, that the opportunity is today. We need to take the technologies that we believe are applicable and test them and do our customer development to make sure that it's the right thing. But we need to do it quickly. And these opportunities don't happen that frequently. And I'm not just on the COVID. I was part of I started one of the first e-commerce consulting companies in the world. And people said, nobody's going to do this. They're not going to buy. And, you know, we're doing Delta and American Airlines, et cetera. Now's an opportunity for those companies to really take off. Now's an opportunity to get out and try, test the market. And it's not about talking about the future. It's about, you know, working on it now. So groups just like this, Kyle, you know, we talk a lot, right? Every week, groups just like this, it just dramatically, exponentially increases our knowledge and the connections. And these kind of things have to happen more and more for us to stay tuned together. So go out, get it done, and talk about the opportunity now.
And call Gary. But I absolutely agree. I mean, I learned so much from each and every one of you, as our audience does as well. I mean, doing this on a daily basis here at VCTV, it's just a wealth of knowledge we're all sharing and collaborating with. And, you know, Elizabeth, to you as well, what advice do you have for those building in this space or looking to maybe, I don't want to say disrupt, but take advantage of the opportunity for where education goes?
Well, I know this might be a little cliche, but actually turn to the younger generation, because actually the way that they approach technology is how we should be thinking of it, because they're coming from it from fresh minds. I mean, I remember when my son, who's now gaming just over there, was about 2, he had the iPad and he made an artwork and then he just swiping it up because he wanted it to print out. So, you know, really tap into what your children are doing and sit with them, game with them, play with them. And actually that will, you know, inspire you to come up with new ideas and new things. And also the other thing I would say to entrepreneurs is just to go for it. I think particularly being in Britain, I see a lot of entrepreneurs that think through all of the problems that could happen. So it's like taking that American mindset and actually just go for it and know that there's going to be problems, but actually part of being an entrepreneur is being a problem solver. So go as fast as you can.
Well, it's like coding. It's guaranteed to break. It's guaranteed to fail. You're going to stay up late trying to figure it out. The point is that you're thinking, exactly, you're thinking through it, right? How many times have we been stuck in a level and just kept replaying it? You know, you're going to get to the boss at some point. You're going to win. Just keep at it. Dion, to you.
Sure. I mean, kind of picking off of what Gary said and saying, Elizabeth, just, you know, the time is now. Just do it, but really think about it. If what you're offering is disruptive, new, different, and you're early stage, you know, where I see probably some lack of attention is really thinking about distribution and you know, your client acquisition. So you may be a disruptor, but if there's some incumbent, let's call it that, it's a university, and they're all trying to figure out right now, how do I go online? How do I offer, you know, interactive chat rooms that are not Zoom or what have you? And let's say you develop that. Think about the partnerships. Think about the relationships that you could have, and how fast, you know, as a startup, can you move by partnering or getting in front of them? And if you can really nail that, you've got a window right now, because we all have this problem. Everyone in education has these problems today, and a lot of people are going to be focusing on them and bringing a lot of very good technologists to it. But I think the business side of, you know, that client acquisition, distribution, partnerships, if you've got an advantage there, go take it, partner with them, and get out to market very, very fast, and you'll be the winner.
Absolutely. And guys, we're at that top of the hour, so I want to come back to closing thoughts. Anything else you want to add on the subject, where things go, what's going to be the future of education? And I say future, looking ahead in the next 6 to 12. Not just right now, where are we going? And then where can everyone find you online? And Dion, we'll start with you. Any other closing thoughts?
Sure. I think we would probably all agree that you know, education fundamentally changing even post-COVID. And once we have a vaccine or before the next COVID, that we're going to be used to learning this way and interacting, and we're going to become, you know, better at it. So let's get used to it. Let's get good at it. Let's get the best tools as soon as possible. And for those of us that are either, you know, investors or in the education space, let's back those, let's back those companies that are out there trying to make it happen. Where you can find me is either on LinkedIn, again, Dion DeLoof, or on our website, AI8ventures.com.
Wonderful. Tony, same to you. Closing thoughts. How many universities are we going to see come together in the M&A space? But really, any closing thoughts that you have, and where can everyone find you online?
I think it's the opportunities are now, and people just exactly like Elizabeth just need to do it. Okay, no entrepreneurs succeeded straight away. You just have to go for it. You learn more from the failures than you do the successes, in my opinion. So So the whole thing is, it's you mentioned about closing thoughts. It's all about asking the questions. We've always had access to this information around the world. It doesn't matter what time. Is the ability to go and find, ask the questions and want to learn. That's the first part. Okay. Same as you're as an investor or somebody who wants to learn, you need to look and ask the questions so you have the answers to go forward with it. And it's simple, just do it. The whole thing is life is too short. Yeah. So the whole thing is, as an investor, as anybody, just do it. If you want to do something, do it. The one thing COVID has shown us, okay, time is short, opportunities disappear very fast, and you adapt to survive. Okay. And that's the way I'm looking at it more than anything else. Okay. So, yeah, so that's it. Very simply, just do it. Life is short and enjoy it. Yeah. Because we're not going out of this alive anyway. So it's all about that. So.
It's not a plug for Nike. That's a quote from Tony.
I never ever said the word. I'm very careful to put the same, okay?
That is true. I'm giving you full credit. Tony says, just do it. Just do it. All right, Gary, to you. Closing thoughts. Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn, Gary Fowler, or GSD Ventures, gsdvs.com, Gary at gsdvs.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody, especially if it's AI related. And closing thoughts, no, this is the opportunity, as I've said many times. And, you know, it's the difference between a success and failure is, you know, having the guts, the grit to go out and just get the stuff done and focus on it. So go out, do it, have more events just like this where you connect together and try it to make sure that people want to buy it.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Elizabeth, closing thoughts and where can everyone find you? And a shameless plug for your coding school as well.
Yeah, you can find our courses on cyphercoders.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, just Elizabeth Friedel. I don't think there's too many of us on there. Unlike, I think Tony Evans has, I think, the most competition in terms of names. But I think closing remarks would just be to really reconsider how education can fit into your life. So, you know, as parents, particularly, how you can seek out and find better educational tools for your children that can be online, and also to not forget how important the in-person kind of education also goes. So those would be my closing remarks.
Wonderful. Everyone, thank you so much for your time today and really diving deep on this very important topic that affects all of us at all parts of our lives. I think we've definitely walking away with a lot here today and where the opportunities are and where so many more can be to each and every one of your points today. So as Tony said it, just do it. As everyone else has iterated, the opportunity is now. If you're looking at education or you're not looking at education, you should be. But if you're looking at education, get started. There's something to do and something to impact at every part of the value chain, at every age level, for any industry and any specialization. You've got 4, 5 plus investors here who are interested in this space and willing to talk to you, hear what you're doing, and looking forward to having you back here on VCTV. To your audience, thank you for tuning in. If you like today's episode, make sure you click subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Thank you to Elena, the entire LA Token team for bringing us together. Thank you, Elizabeth, Dion, Gary, thank you. Tony, I know you're giving me a thumbs up, but nonetheless, thank you, everybody. We'll be back here tomorrow on another episode of VCTV to dive further into newer technologies, what's happening, what's coming. Thank you for the applause, Gary, and how you can be prepared. I'm Kyle Ellicott, your host.